have some time to look at questions 1 to 6. Now the full test will begin. You should answer the questions as you listen, as the recording is not played twice. Listen carefully to the conversation and answer questions 1 to 6.
Good morning, my name is Mrs. Davis. I was wondering if this is the place to ask about the summer sports camp.
It is, madam. My name's Philip, and I can answer any questions you might have.
I have a 12-year-old boy called Dominic, and he always gets bored in the summer holidays. I need to keep him busy.
We have a group for 11 to 13-year-olds, so that should be fine.
Will Dominic be all right playing with boys a year older than him?
Oh yes, we find that at that age group, the students haven't usually outgrown each other, so they can play sport together without any problems.
So, who does the coaching of the sports?
We are a very professional outfit. The management are all ex-sports professionals, and our instructors are usually sports science students.
Are the students on their own with the children?
No. They're always supervised by more experienced coaches. Everyone receives an enhanced police check for working with children, and we run our own training at the start of the summer. All our staff are ready and trained for groups of children.
What if there are any injuries?
All our instructors and coaches are qualified in first aid. There is also the hospital just round the corner if there's a bad injury. It's good to have that nearby, but we haven't had to go there yet.
I know it's unlikely, but it's always possible with that many children running around playing sport.
I quite agree.
Now, I want to ask about clothing. I suppose I should make sure Dominic has warm clothing when he goes.
Well, Dominic will be there all day, and the weather can be changeable. I'd advise you to make sure that Dominic has warm clothing and changes of clothing.
Where will the children go if it rains? Is everything outside?
Our location is next to Wentmount School, and we can use their sports complex when it rains. It's a big place, and as soon as there's any bad weather, we'll be inside.
That's good to know. Now, what parts of the day will Dominic be at the sports camp?
We have morning sessions, afternoon sessions, or Dominic can stay all day. What would you prefer?
I think all day. He can make lots of new friends and tire himself out. What about lunch?
You can send him with a packed lunch, or he can join in with the lunches we provide.
What sort of food do you serve?
There will be a basic starter, such as soup or salad, a solid and hot main course, and fruit for dessert.
That sounds nice and healthy.
Oh yes, it's a sports camp, and we feel that healthy food is all part of that.
So Dominic will only need clothing with him?
Well, some sports need special equipment. For example, goalkeepers use gloves, and all players use shin pads. I expect Dominic will want to use his own.
Yes, that's true.
By the way, as Dominic's a young boy, it would be good for him to have some snacks with him for the mornings and afternoons.
Okay, I'll make a note of that. By the way, I don't know the timings of the day. At what time does it all start and end?
We start at 9:30 a.m. We don't do it any earlier, as the children are on holiday, and it's nice for them to stay in bed a little longer than their normal school days.
That's a good idea. At Dominic's age, children will stay in bed until midday if they get the chance.
I've a son that age as well, so I know what you're talking about. The end of the morning session is at 12:30, and then we start again at 1:30. The afternoon session runs to 4:30. We ask that all children are picked up by 5 o'clock, as the instructors will need to get home as well.
Before the conversation continues, you have some time to look at questions 7 to 10. Now listen carefully and answer questions 7 to 10.
Now, I need to know some things about Dominic. What games does Dominic like playing?
He likes all sports. He's quite good at cricket and swimming, but his preferred sport is football.
Okay, we do plenty of all those.
Where do you swim?
Wentmount School has both indoor and outdoor pools. We do lots of swimming, both for training and just for fun. It's a great way for the children to get fit and to have a good time. Now, does Dominic have any allergies or anything else we should know about?
He's not allergic to anything. He has strong legs and he can run for ages. He was in hospital sick in December for appendicitis, but that has all cleared up now. One thing is that in the winter we went skiing and Dominic broke his arm. It's all healed now, but I think you should be aware of that.
Thank you, I've made a note of that. Now, we need to know how Dominic will go home every evening. We have a duty of care to all the children who will be with us, and we need to know whether we have to look after them until someone comes, or whether they will be going home by themselves.
The first week I'll pick him up, and then after that he can take the bus home. I expect by then he'll have lots of friends to travel with.
Good, that will be in Dominic's notes. You can change your plans, of course. Just make sure you let us know, so we can make sure he's safe at the end of each day.
I will.
Now, the last thing is for you to fill out an application form. You can see the information about all the fees at the end there. Pay the fees by bank transfer and put the reference number in the appropriate box on the application form.
What happens if the course is filled up by the time you get the form?
Don't worry about that. I've reserved Dominic a place. Just call me on the phone number on the form if you change your mind, so I can enrol someone else. I'll keep the place for you for 2 weeks.
Can I give the form in by hand to you tomorrow? I'll be shopping near here then.
That'll be fine. Just make sure the payment is done, as the reservation isn't secure until we receive that. Once we have the form, you'll get an email within a week to confirm everything.
That is the end of section 1. You will now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turn to Section 2. Section 2. You will hear a crime prevention and fire safety officer talking to a group of new residents. First, you have some time to look at questions 11 to 15. Listen carefully and answer questions 11 to 15.
Good evening. Last week, Mr. Jenkins spoke to you about home security. My name is Malcolm Fletcher, and tonight I'm going to talk about personal safety when driving and fire safety in the home. Of course, we shouldn't go around perpetually frightened of all the bad things that might happen to us, but there are some sensible precautions that we should all take to avoid getting hurt. You probably know already that a great number of serious assaults occur in the vicinity of motor vehicles. You should always be alert when walking to your car, and check the rear seat of your car before getting in. This is especially important in isolated parking areas or the far corners of major shopping complexes. Now, once inside your car, get into the habit of locking the doors. Always keep the windows up and the doors locked, especially if you're travelling alone. If at all possible, steer clear of isolated roads after dark. Even with all the high-tech communication devices we have today, many serious crimes are committed on lonely back roads. Make sure your vehicle is mechanically sound, and ensure you have adequate fuel in the tank at all times. If your vehicle does break down in a lonely spot, lift the bonnet and then lock yourself inside the car and call for help on your mobile phone. Never, under any circumstances, leave your vehicle and go with a stranger to seek help. It is better to wait for the police or some other emergency vehicle to stop and offer assistance. Of course, you should never pick up a hitchhiker. Some of the most serious crimes committed in this country have been a direct result of this foolish practice. If you think you're being followed by someone in another vehicle, ideally you should drive to the nearest police station. But if there isn't one within easy reach, drive to the nearest open service station or shop, or the nearest occupied house. Now, we are lucky enough to have a police station in this area. Do any of you know where it is? Look at this map on the screen, and I'll show you how to get to it from the community centre where you are now. Then, when you get home, you can work out how to get there from other directions. From the community centre, go along Bayview Street toward Maiden Avenue. At the roundabout, take the second exit onto Lee Street. Go past the medical clinic, and at the next roundabout, take the first exit onto Moore Street. You should continue on Moore Street until you have passed the little block of shops on the left and the church on the right. Stay on Moore Street until you go over the bridge, and then turn right into Canal Street. You'll find the police station on the corner of Canal Street and Cockleshell Court.
Before you hear the rest of the talk, you have some time to look at questions 16 to 20. Now listen and answer questions 16 to 20.
Now let's move on to fire safety. Before I talk to you about safety precautions and procedures, I'd like to mention some of the effects of smoke and heat on humans. There are 4 ingredients of fire, namely oxygen, fuel, heat, and chain reactions. Almost all materials burn, and most household goods burn very easily. The air we breathe contains about 21% oxygen. As fire burns, it consumes oxygen, thereby reducing the oxygen content of the air. When that is reduced to 15%, oxygen deficiencies in body tissue cause an impairment of muscle control and dexterity. At between 10 and 14%, judgment and reasoning are affected. Oxygen reduction to between 6 and 10% results in unconsciousness, and breathing stops. Sounds scary, doesn't it? But that's not all you have to worry about. Many materials in the home give off toxic gases as they burn. The main toxic gases are carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, hydrogen sulfide, and nitrogen oxide. Carbon monoxide is an invisible and odorless gas produced in all fires. It takes up the place of oxygen in the blood, thereby reducing the supply of oxygen to the brain. The effect of carbon dioxide is to increase the heart rate and stimulate the rate of breathing, causing an increase in the intake of other toxic gases, which contributes to, amongst other symptoms, serious oxygen deprivation. Hydrogen sulfide, on the other hand, affects the nervous system, causing dizziness and pain in the respiratory system. It does occur naturally in volcanic gases and hot springs, and it also results from the bacterial breakdown of organic matter. You're probably familiar with it. You know, it has that characteristic odour of rotten eggs. But make no mistake, in large concentrations, it's deadly. Lastly, nitrogen oxide is another extremely poisonous gas at high levels of concentration, which deadens feeling in the throat and lungs, causes swelling in the throat, and a build-up of fluids in the lungs.
That is the end of Section 2. You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turn to Section 3. Section 3, you will hear 2 students giving a university presentation to their teacher. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 25. Now listen carefully and answer questions 21 to 25.
Good morning. Are we all here? Good. In today's seminar, we're going to hear a presentation from two students. The schedule says it's Lisa and Patrick. Are you both ready?
Yes, Professor Black, we're ready. Shall we begin?
Yes, please, Lisa.
Well, Patrick and I are going to talk about the flower industry in Kenya.
The flower industry in Kenya? I didn't even know they had one there.
Oh yes, Kenya's horticultural sector currently ranks as one of the economy's fastest growing industries, the third largest foreign exchange earner after tourism and tea.
The industry has been growing every year. The industry rose 31% over the last 5 years, with total exports reaching 130,000 tonnes per annum.
How did the industry begin there? It doesn't sound like a traditional Kenyan industry.
No, the history of the export of fresh horticultural produce from Kenya dates back to the period before independence, when Kenya, then a British colony, was required to help out with the running of the budget for East Africa.
After independence, the industry continued to thrive, with exports starting to go to Europe, and thus opening up the potential for Kenya in the export market.
Is Kenya's climate particularly suitable for growing flowers?
Yes. Although Kenya is on the equator, considerable differences in altitude allow a great variety of climatic conditions from the hot coastal plain up to the cool highlands. A temperate climate prevails above 1,500 metres, where daytime temperatures are from 22 to 30 degrees Celsius, and nighttime from 6 to 12 degrees Celsius.
Rain days are restricted to 60 to 80 days. So there's excellent radiation most of the year, which is ideal for the year-round growing of quality flowers without the necessity of greenhouse conditions.
Kenya has enjoyed economic advantages as well. Kenyan companies have long benefited from favourable exchange rates, making their costs in Kenyan shillings and US dollars relatively low.
The Kenyans have also set up an excellent logistics infrastructure. Nairobi, the capital city, is a major hub and is very well served by major airlines and charter operators, giving easy air freight access to European markets, and from there to the rest of the world.
And labour and energy costs are low compared to other countries. A further advantage for Kenya is that the industry still pays no import duty when sending its flowers to Europe.
How has the industry affected the ordinary people in Kenya?
Pretty well. In the agricultural sector, floriculture in Kenya is the second largest foreign exchange earner, after tea, bringing in more than 250 million US dollars per annum. Of course, this doesn't all go to the man on the street, but it creates a lot of taxes that contribute to Kenya's public economy.
The industry does employ a lot of ordinary people, though, with 50 to 70,000 people directly employed and more than 1.5 million indirectly employed.
You now have some time to look at questions 26 to 30. Now listen to the rest of the discussion and answer questions 26 to 30.
It seems like an ideal situation for Kenya, with no problematic areas.
It's not perfect, and some years haven't been easy. For example, there have been problems with workforce disputes, which have not yet been wholly resolved.
Some years as well have had problems as high oil prices negatively affected transportation fees. There have also been years when, in spite of the excellent climate, there were heavy rains or extended drought, which negatively affected the size of the crop at those times.
What about competition?
Most competition comes from countries that, like Kenya, lie on or near the equator. The 4 leading global competitors in terms of export value are the Netherlands, Colombia, Ecuador and Ethiopia. These countries compete with each other on the same markets in Europe, Russia and North America, and competition is getting more tense every year.
What's causing the increase in competition?
It's partly due to stagnating demand, but it's also a result of the growing number of large flowered roses and the generally improving quality of the other countries' products.
Hasn't there been some criticism of the sustainability of the industry?
Yes. Although things have improved, wages are significantly below a living wage, leaving workers and their families with limited or no disposable income. Finally, trade union membership is often discouraged and undermined.
One of the biggest ongoing criticisms is about water usage. The water footprint of one rose flower is estimated to be 7 to 13 litres. The total virtual water export related to the removal of cut flowers from the area where the flowers have been grown has been colossal. The water leaves the country and the continent, and it's not easily replaced.
This has caused an observed decline in the levels of local lakes and a deterioration of the lake's biodiversity.
There is also a problem with pollution in the large lakes that supply water for the industry. Initially, everyone blamed the large producers, but it seems that although the commercial farms around the lake have contributed to the decline in the lake level through water abstractions, both the commercial farms and the smallholder farms in the upper catchment are responsible for the lake pollution due to nutrient load.
How can this be addressed?
There have been calls for sustainable management of the basin through charging water at its full cost and other regulatory measures. But any change in prices has been resisted, and there are a variety of political and tribal barriers to getting legislation passed and enforced.
Are there any other downsides to the Kenyan flower industry?
Yes, there have been some criticisms of outdated farm methods. However, more farms are increasingly looking into organic methods of pest control, and those farms that have implemented water recycling and waste disposal systems have found that they are able to decrease overall costs in the long run.
That is the end of section 3. You will now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turn to Section 4. Section 4. You will hear a talk on the topic of decision-making and problem-solving. First, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 40. Listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 40.
Good morning. Today, as part of your business management course, we're starting a unit on problem-solving skills and decision-making. Let's start with a powerful decision-making technique developed by Edward de Bono in his book 6 Thinking Hats, which you'll find on your required reading list. The method works by compelling you to move outside your habitual ways of thinking. Often, success in business results from rational, positive thinking. But these approaches, used in combination with quite different ones, will improve the overall quality of your decision-making. Now, each thinking hat has a different colour and represents a different style of thinking. Let's start with the white hat. When you're wearing the white hat, you look at the information you have. You look at historical trends and try to analyse them. And you take account of gaps in your knowledge and try to fill them. On the other hand, if you're wearing the red hat, you listen to your gut reaction and instincts. You also try to imagine the intuitive response that other people might have. How would other people, who are unaware of your reasoning and all the facts at your disposal, react? That brings us to the black hat next. Black hat thinking, as its name suggests, is cautious and defensive, and you examine why something might not work. It all sounds very negative, but it is essential to know what the weak points in a plan of action might be. It permits you to alter your approach, eliminate problems, or at least be ready with contingency plans if the worst happens. After all, it is better to spot the fatal flaw and know the risks before you undertake a new enterprise. The opposite viewpoint, of course, comes with the yellow hat. It helps you to continue when the outlook is gloomy or the problems seem insurmountable. Think positively, and you'll see all the advantages and values of the decision, and all the opportunities it brings. Let's look at what the green hat has to offer now. It stands for freewheeling, imaginative, inspired, innovative thinking, where there is little or no criticism of ideas. Original solutions to a problem are more likely to arise when you're wearing the green hat. Finally, the blue hat. This is the hat that the person chairing the meeting wears. The blue hat is in charge and organizes the meeting. He or she can point activities in the direction of other coloured hats when required. For example, if ideas have dried up, the blue hat will suggest more green hat thinking. If there is too much exuberance and enthusiasm for an idea, the blue hat will ask for black hat thinking to ensure that any possible defects have been addressed. Needless to say, you can use 6 thinking hats by yourself, but it really comes into its own when participants with different thinking styles come together to make a sound decision. Now, another useful way to generate radical ideas or creative solutions to a problem is brainstorming. You're all familiar with the term brainstorming, and I'm sure you've all done it from time to time. But even in well-managed groups, sometimes big egos intimidate less confident participants, who in turn may feel pressured to conform, or are inhibited because of their respect for authority. What I would suggest in this case is a system called the step-ladder technique. If you follow the flowchart on the board, you'll see there are just 5 basic steps. Firstly, members contribute on an individual level. The task is presented to them. They are given time to think and form their own opinions about how to solve the problem. You do this before you get them together as a group. Secondly, you form a core group of just 2 people and allow them time to discuss the topic of concern. In the third step, a third member is added to the core group, but, and this is most important, that third person presents his or her thoughts before having a chance to hear the proposals that have already been put forward. When all 3 have explained their ideas, then they can consider their options collectively. In step 4, the same process is repeated. A word of advice here. Keep the group small to maximize effectiveness. You can limit the numbers to 4, or add more, but I wouldn't go above 7, not if you want a good quality decision. The last step in the process is to get a final decision, but only after all members have been included and had the opportunity to communicate their ideas. The main benefit of this step-by-step method is to give even the most diffident and quietist people the chance to share their ideas before they can be influenced by others.
That is the end of Section 4. You now have half a minute to check your answers.